So as I mentioned, we've come to the end of our study in Romans. This is week 23. And even though we've come to the end of our study in Romans, and we will be moving on to a study in the Ten Commandments, study of the Ten Commandments, we haven't come to the end of the message of Romans. In other words, we're not leaving what Paul has said here behind and going on to something else. In fact, as I mentioned when we started this series, everything we believe about God, grace, sin, and salvation can be found in Romans, so that I was able to say at the very beginning of this series that Romans really is our missive as a church. From the fount of Romans gushes everything we love and everything we say and everything that we are about here as a church. It was Martin Luther's reading of Romans that launched the first Reformation, that changed everything, that challenged religion, the religion of the day and the religious gatekeepers of the day. It was Martin Luther's reading of Romans that launched the first Reformation. And if we ever hope to experience another one, it'll be by rediscovering the message in Romans all over again and championing the remarkable, mind-blowing truths that we've looked at for the last 23 weeks. But we have made it to the end, and there are a couple of things to notice as we close. When I first started laying out this series, and I started thinking about what in the world would I say about chapter 16? I mean, what's going on here? He pretty much ends the meat of what he says in chapter 15. So this is nothing more, it seems, like a formal greeting, a formal goodbye, whatever. And what is it about this chapter that can help us, that kind of wraps everything up that we've learned together? Well, Paul is wrapping things up in this chapter, and before he closes with his doxology in verses 25 to 27, he spends some time doing two things: thanking people, which we read, and warning people, which we read. Thanking people and, in essence, warning us. He thanks people in verses 1 to 16, and he thanks a bunch of people who, as you know, whose names I can't pronounce except for Mary and Rufus. And you walk away from that going, okay, so can we just move on to something else? Is there something else that Paul is actually trying to get at here? I mean, really, what purpose does this serve? How does Paul, reading off a list of names, thanking a bunch of people that we don't know, whose names we can't pronounce, actually help us? What does it tell us about God and sin and grace and all of those things? And it may seem, as it did to me, like nothing more important than one of those acceptance speeches where the winner thanks a bunch of people that no one knows. At the Grammys or the Oscars or whatever. I don't know. Those two things the same. I get those things confused. Anyway, movies, music, whatever. MTV, music awards. When people stand up and they thank a bunch of people that no one knows to help the people who helped them sort of get to where they are so that they could win the award, win the prize. Is that what's going on here? I mean, that's kind of what it seemed like to me when I first read it. But in saying what he says here in these verses, let me suggest this. Paul is actually showing how free he is. And it may not be obvious at first, but in these verses, Paul is actually giving us an autobiographical illustration of his freedom. He has trumpeted freedom, the freedom that we have because of what Jesus has done. He has trumpeted our rescue, our salvation, God's love for broken down people like us in such a remarkable way. And here in these verses, I want to suggest that there is something better, something more, something bigger going on than simply Paul rattling off a bunch of names of people that we don't know and whose names we can't pronounce. He is actually, in doing this, in thanking all of these people, he is giving us an autobiographical illustration. He's demonstrating his own freedom. You see, Paul knows that he's just one person on a team. He doesn't suffer from a God complex thinking that if it's going to get done, he has to do it. That this whole thing's riding on his shoulders. The gospel has set him free from the delusion of thinking that he's on a one-man mission and that by himself he's going to change the world and fix everything. I mean, by virtue of the fact that Paul is thanking all of these people who he's basically saying, the gospel would have never reached you if it weren't for these people. That's a remarkable illustration of his freedom, and I'll bring this home here in a minute for us, because far too often we bear the weight of the world on our shoulders. If things are ever going to turn out the way we need them, we have to do it. We have to make sure it gets done. This is life by law. I'm kind of sad this morning because we sent Gabe back to school this morning, and I know I joke a lot about, me looking forward to empty nest, which is going to happen really soon for us. But the fact is, I love my kids. I love when they're in my home. I love when our house is like Grand Central Station. I never know who's sleeping there. I never know who's eating there. I came home, a couple of weeks ago, and a couple of the students were skipping class in my house, in my loft, playing PlayStation or whatever it is we have up there. I'm like, what do you guys do? They're not even trying to hide. When I skipped school, I at least tried to hide, I went to a buddy's house whose parents both worked. They just show up at my house, sit on the couch. My son wasn't even there. I'm like, what are you guys doing here? Or shouldn't you be in class? They're like, nah, I don't even remember what they said after that. It's something about a free period. I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. But I mean, that's the kind of home that we have, I guess, where people just show up. And I miss that. I miss that when Gabe goes back to school. And his friends don't come around anymore, and his precious girlfriend, Jamie, who we love, isn't there anymore because she's back at school, and next year Nate will be going off to school, and, his pack of friends won't be there either, and it'll just be Kim and Jenna and me, which in one sense sounds glorious to me, but in another sense is very sad to me because I love my boys, and I love having them around, and I love their friends, and all of that stuff. But the reason I'm telling you that is because for us as parents, oftentimes we burden ourselves by thinking that if they're going to turn out okay, if they're going to be everything we long for them to be, it's up to us. We have to be the ones to make it happen. We have to fix them where they're broken. We have to do everything for them because they're never going to do it themselves. And if you multiply that dynamic across every sector of your life, what you discover is that we end up burdening ourselves with this delusion that this whole thing's riding on our shoulders, that it's up to us. If things are going to get done, and if they're going to get done well, then we have to be the ones to do it. Well, this is life by law. And Paul is saying, just by thanking all of these people, by shining the spotlight on all of these people, he's saying, I've been set free from the law of self-justification. I've been set free by this delusion of needing to make it happen on my own. I mean, we tend to do this all the time. We have to micromanage our kids, our spouse, our circumstances, our career, our reputation. We have to make sure it goes according to our plan, because if it doesn't, we'll lose everything. It's the way we approach life. No one has to teach us to approach life that way. That's just the way we naturally approach life. That's our default setting, that this thing is riding on us. And all of those little things may seem like not a big deal, but they're a huge deal because what they reveal is our addiction to self-justification. We need to make it happen. We have to get it right, because if we don't, we will be unjustified. Our lives will be meaningless. We believe that what we do and accomplish determines who we are, our value. In other words, our default setting is justification by works. And so we take on more than we can bear. But Paul has preached throughout Romans that we are justified by what someone else has done, not by what we do. That was the thing that Martin Luther read in Romans chapter 1 that absolutely turned his world, and consequently the rest of the world, upside down. This idea that the justified shall live by faith, meaning justification, our validation, is dependent on the work of another, not our work. That has profound existential and experiential consequences in our life when we get that. When we get the fact that we are justified, that we're in forever, that changes the way you and I approach everything in life. Because no longer are we working for love, we're working from love. No longer are we working for acceptance, we're working from acceptance. No longer are we working for validation, we are working from a posture of validation, from a position of validation. You see, the gospel of grace frees us to let go. It allows us to revel in our unimportance. It's amazing. I mean, think about that. The gospel allows us, it liberates us, it frees us to revel in our unimportance. It liberates us to be one of many rather than a one-man show. If it's going to get done, I got to do it. If he's going to be changed, I got to change him. If she's going to get fixed, I got to fix her. If things are going to happen in my life the way that I want them to happen in my life, if everything's going to go according to our plan, I have to be the executor of that plan. That makes life incredibly heavy. You see, grace does something inside of you that makes you want to love and share the spotlight. And this is what Paul gets here. He gets that the gospel of grace removes the pressure to be noticed and to clamor for credit. A number of years ago, it was actually 5 years ago, it was my idea to organize, not that I would organize it, but it was my idea to organize our first ever in the history of this church men's retreat. And it was an amazing time. And let me just add a parenthetical advertisement for our upcoming men's retreat in September. If you haven't signed up, sign up. I promise you, you will not be disappointed. Okay, moving on. So it was my idea, and I thought this would be a great way for guys to bond and just get together and get to know one another. Our church felt brand new at the time. We had gone through a lot of transition, and our church felt brand new, and I wanted men in this church to get to know one another, guys in this church to get to know one another in kind of a loose and laid-back atmosphere, and so it was my idea to organize a men's retreat, and it was a smashing success. A smashing success. Not because I organized it. I can barely organize anything except my thoughts and sentences. But other than that, so it wasn't a smashing success because I organized it, but it was organized and it was amazing. It was my idea. And so at the conclusion of that retreat, I can't remember who it was. God has graced me to forget who it was. Stood up and said, "This has been an amazing time together, has it not?" "Yes, it's been an amazing time." "It's been a remarkable time, has it not?" "Yes, it's been a remarkable time." All the guys were, sort of riding high. And I can't remember who it was, but this person went on to thank a list of people who made it happen. And I was just waiting. I was going to be the grand finale, I mean, it was my idea. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for me, okay? It was no one thought about this. I thought about this, all right? The reason you guys are riding high is because of me, all right? And so I was waiting, the list of names is going on, thanks so-and-so, and you were amazing, and thank you so-and-so, and oh, this guy was amazing, blah, blah, all that stuff. This wouldn't have happened without him, and all of that stuff. And I was just waiting, I'm sitting there, one of the front tables, which I should have been sitting in the back anyway. Who did I think I was? Sitting at the head of the table, and my name was never mentioned. And I promise you, as embarrassing as this is to admit, I'm the pastor of the church, I should be the most humble, the most deferential, the godliest, the holiest. And I'm sitting there, and the first thought that went through my mind was, what? What about me? I promise you, okay? I promise you. First thought that went through my mind. Like, what? Hello, what's my name? Skip? Bad joke. And I literally, it was like a gospel moment for me. Because I'm like, what is it inside of us messed up people that instinctively, spontaneously, without being coached whatsoever, responds that way? What is sick about inside of me that would immediately respond that way? Instinctively respond that way. Now, that may not be the case for you when it comes to organizing a men's retreat or a party or something like that, but you know that's the case for you in 1,000 different ways. One of the best stand-up comedy acts ever, if you're old enough to remember this, was that one from the early 80s, Bill Cosby himself. Did you ever see it? Okay, it's like the best ever, all right? And at one point, he talks about how mothers get so much more credit than fathers. And he gives an illustration about how he taught his boy to play football from the time he was like 2. Taught him how to first roll the ball to him, and then as he got a little bit older, pass the ball, taught him how to catch, taught him how to throw, spent hours and hours and hours as his son was growing up, teaching him how to throw the football, teaching him the game of football, the strategy of football, how to play football, what you got to do to win a football game, blah, blah, blah. And he says, the first time my son caught a touchdown pass, first time. And he said, and I'm jumping, up and down on the sideline, thinking to myself, I taught him to do that. Who's the first person he thanks? Just want to thank my mother. Because your mother never spent a second teaching you how to throw the football. Hilarious illustration, but that's so true for all of us in a lot of different ways. I mean, we clamor for credit. Why do we do that? Why are we so slow to share the spotlight? We're quick to sort of dismiss ourselves from the scene when it doesn't go according to plan. But if it does go according to plan, we want some notice. I mean, we want some credit for it. You see, grace assures you that you've been forever loved and eternally noticed by a loving Father, and it therefore liberates you to be inclusive, to cheer for others, to be grateful, to be thankful, to be deferential. Grace frees you from the burden of fighting for your rights and fighting for attention. It unburdens you from needing affirmation in order to feel important. I mean, Paul could have easily said, this whole Gentile thing, if you're a Gentile and you believe in Jesus, thank me. Because prior to me coming onto the scene, you guys were ostracized. I made Gentile salvation vogue, okay? I mean, I made it in fashion. So give me some credit. And just about every single person he lists here is a non-Jew. They've got Greek names. And here's Paul, perfectly, I guess, justified in one sense to think, I deserve some credit for this. I mean, the gospel has made it to Rome, the reigning city of the day. And what does he say? He passes the ball. He's deferential. He shines the spotlight. Well, there's something about that tells us just how free he is, that he's able to do that. You see, Paul's freedom to be a cheerleader for others comes from being graced by God. Secure people love better than insecure people, don't they? I mean, secure people who are secure, they just love better than insecure people. They give more than insecure people. Insecure people are afraid to give themselves away. They're afraid to give love because they're not sure they're going to get love in return. Well, secure people love better than insecure people. And because of what Jesus has done for you, you can't get more secure than you are right now. You can't get more secure than you are right now. Nothing you can do to get more security. There's nothing you can do to get more validated, to get more love, to get more justified. There's nothing you can do. It's been given to you. And when you understand that, as Paul does here, you're able to give yourself away. You're able to love. You're able to shine the spotlight on other people. You're no longer living under the burden of needing credit, needing affirmation, needing to be the center of attention, needing to be a one-man show, needing to micromanage and make sure that everything goes according to your plan. Paul gets that, and so he rattles off these unpronounceable names of people, small people that no one's ever heard of before, most of them anyway, and he's able to say, if it wasn't for them, this wouldn't happen. This wouldn't have even gotten to you. This message would have not gotten to you. He understands he's one of many. He's able to revel in his expendability. Expendability. It is remarkably, as you've heard me say before, it's remarkably freeing and liberating to embrace your expendability. I mean, it's when you fail to believe you're expendable, life becomes burdensome. When you understand that you're expendable, you're loved by your family and you're loved by your friends, but ultimately the world was going on before you arrived and it will go on after you leave, that you're expendable. People are forgotten fast, You and I will be forgotten very fast, very fast. We work so hard to make sure that we establish a legacy, whatever that means. I can't stand that, by the way. I can't stand it. Nowhere in the Bible are we called to establish our legacy. Okay, we're called to do lots of things, but we're not called to establish our legacy. We're called to broker the legacy of the gospel to the people behind us, but we're not called to establish our legacy. But you and I will be forgotten fast, believe it or not. Just in my own family. My kids will probably hear one, maybe two stories in their lifetime about my own father. The distance is just vast. Jenna will grow up having simply vague memories of Papa T, my dad, because he died when she was young. Jenna never knew Kim's dad, ever. He died before she was born. My boys were small when Kim's dad died. We come and we go. We're forgotten fast, very fast. And the only thing that can enable us to digest that and be okay with that is the gospel. That this whole thing has never been riding on us. It never will be riding on us. It's a glorious thing to finally embrace the fact that we're not that important, that we're fairly expendable. And Paul gets that, and so he's able to share the wealth, so to speak. He's able to spread the bounty. He's able to shine the spotlight on other people and say, this isn't about me. Ultimately, it's about Jesus. And if it wasn't for these people here, you would have never heard about Jesus. So he thanks people, and in thanking people, he's revealing something about his own freedom, something about how the gospel has gripped him and set him free from the need to clamor for credit and to justify himself. But he also warns us, beginning in verse 17, he tells us to watch out. He basically says, stay away from anyone who tries to water everything I just said down, and there will be many. There will be many who will try to water the radicality of what I've taught you down. There will be tons. Paul's been clear throughout the letter. God's demand, be perfect. God's diagnosis, nobody's perfect. God's deliverance, Jesus was perfect for you. That's the message of Romans. That's the message of the Bible. God's demand, be perfect. That's it. That's the standard. God's diagnosis, you're not perfect. God's deliverance, Jesus came to be perfect for you. So he's been very, very clear about that. And he's saying, basically, watch out for those theologians. He's not talking about, we read this oftentimes, people inside the church read this and go, watch out for those people outside the church. The atheists, the bad people, the pornographers. Watch out for those people. Those are the people we have to be on guard against. Paul's essentially saying, no, watch out for the theologians. Watch out for the preachers. That's who you need to watch out for. Because they're theologians and because they're preachers, because they're pastors, our guards are down. We automatically think that if they just open their Bible, they're speaking the truth and they're reliable. And Paul says, watch out for those theologians and preachers who nuance grace to death so that it ends up being less scandalous and freeing. What does he say they're doing? When you nuance grace to death, I've told you before, I grew up Christian home, church, school, heard a lot about grace, heard the word grace a lot, but I heard more about what it wasn't than what it was. I heard a lot more about what it wasn't than what it was. I didn't hear about grace, what I've come to learn and believe about it. I mean, you don't talk to a teenager about grace. That's the last thing you do, because then they will take advantage of it and go do bad stuff. And the whole goal of parenting is to keep your kids from doing bad stuff, right? That's the whole goal. And so we don't talk about this stuff, and you certainly don't talk about it in Christian schools. We do, but we certainly don't talk about it in Christian schools, not when I was growing up. Because, man, you start talking about the radicality of this stuff, and you let this beast out of the cage. I mean, there'll be just rampant sex going on all over the place, drug use, alcohol abuse, car crashes, you name it. I mean, you can't talk about this stuff, okay? That's what Paul's warning against. He said, he's warning against listening to anybody who waters the mind-blowing radicality of this stuff down. Watch out for those people. Watch out for those people who nuance grace to death so that it ends up being less scandalous and freeing. He says in verse 17, they're creating obstacles. They put things in the way of your understanding of just how unbelievable, literally unbelievable it is. How otherworldly it is. They put things in the way. And he says, watch out for those people. He says that divisions always accompany departure. When we depart from the gospel, divisions happen. I mean, the further you move away from the centrality of what he's taught for 15 chapters, the more you move away from that, the more divisions occur. You see, the law of God needs to be preached in full force. Not some cheapened, dumbed down version like do your best and God will do the rest. Try hard. Just try hard. God knows you're not perfect. And he sees your heart. He does see your heart. And he says it's deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Okay? I mean, I'd rather you see my heart than God see my heart, honestly. Because he sees the things that you can't see, the things that I hide. But I mean, this idea that, just, do your best and God will do the rest. Just God knows you're trying. He knows you're trying. It's okay. He knows you're trying. That's not the law. Okay? It's not, just try hard to become a better you and you can have everything that you've always hoped for. Just do a little bit more. Be a little bit better. That's cheap law. The law that Paul gives us in Romans is preached in full force. Essentially, be perfect. You want to know what God's standard is? You want to know how God will love you and accept you? It's simple. It's really simple. All you have to do is be perfect. Perfect. Perfect on the outside, perfect on the inside. That's all you got to do. Be perfect. That's the law full throat. And that needs to be preached full force, not some cheap and dumbed down version. It needs to be preached in full force. And the gospel then needs to be preached in its full force. Jesus paid it all, period. You're covered, forgiven, loved. You don't have to do one more thing. You're in forever, regardless of how badly you mess up. That needs to be preached. And we can never get there when you confuse law and gospel. You dumb this down and, you sort of dumb this down. People don't feel desperate, and therefore they don't feel their deliverance. So Paul's saying, avoid those who dumb down the law. Just try your best, because you're never going to have your ears open to your need if that's what you're hearing. And avoid those who dumb down the gospel, who try to add something to it, who try to say, the gospel isn't just Jesus paid it all. It is finished. It's not just an announcement that it is finished. It's also something you must do. It's not. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that out there. What Paul has told us is because of what Jesus has done for you, condemnation is no longer possible. That's amazing. Because of what Jesus has done for you, condemnation is an impossibility. Impossible. I mean, literally, if you are in Christ, you could walk out of here today and in a fit of anger, kill someone. And you have not sacrificed 1 ounce of God's love for you. Now you go, now hold on a second. No, don't hold on a second. That's true. We're not justified by whether or not we kill someone or not. We're justified by the one who was killed on our behalf. You see, we have these qualifications in our mind. We have these inhibitions, these red flags that go off inside of us. They go, no, wait a second, nuance that. Hold on a minute, qualify that. Hold on, footnote that, because that's not everything that could be. Stop it, okay? Just stop it. If it doesn't blow you away and go, what? You haven't heard the gospel. It's that otherworldly, okay? It's that crazy. It's that counterintuitive. In the end, Christianity should feel like my chains fell off, not I haven't done enough. That's the way it should feel. You know the difference. You know the difference when you hear stuff. If you listen to a preacher or read a book, you know the difference. Do you walk away feeling weighed down, like, I'm not doing enough, and I better do more if God's going to love me, if God's going to like me? Is that the way you feel? Or is it, my chains have fallen off, I feel lighter? Christianity, in the end, should feel like my chains fell off, not I haven't done enough. So anyone who says anything other than this, says Paul, is to be avoided. Those are the kinds of people that Paul says to avoid. There are lots of preachers out there that preach the Bible who water this down. Okay, who remove the shock. Don't just think that if they stand up and they open their Bible and they go verse by verse and chapter by chapter and precept by precept and book by book and blah, 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 that they're preaching Jesus. I mentioned last week or the week before that, the two disciples on the road to Emmaus knew their Bibles remarkably well. They had been taught their Bibles remarkably well, and they completely missed Jesus. It's possible to preach the Bible and miss Jesus. And there are guys out there who do that. I'm not talking about the self-help nonsense that's out there. Okay, that you and I are probably not going to be drawn to that kind of thing. Okay, you wouldn't be here today if you didn't believe the Bible and want to hear the Bible preached and that sort of thing, because we're committed to that here. So I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about looking at the whack jobs on television and going, oh my God, okay, yes, avoid that. That's sort of, ABC stuff. Okay, I shouldn't have to tell you to avoid certain kinds of preachers that you might hear or see. But he's talking about the ones that seem safe. That seem reliable. Why? Because they preach the Bible. Are they preaching Jesus? It's not just enough to preach the Bible. Are they preaching Jesus? When you're done listening to a sermon, do you feel lighter? Are you feeling more enamored and blown away by what Jesus has done? Does it feel like your chains have fallen off? You see, if it doesn't make you feel desperate and exposed, you haven't heard the law. And if it doesn't make you go, wait a second, this sounds too good to be true, you haven't heard the gospel. The gospel of grace contains no buts and breaks. It cannot be qualified or footnoted. It's radical, crazy sounding, counterintuitive, and seemingly dangerous. And when it comes to the gospel, as I mentioned, all of our internal red flags and inhibitions are unreliable and dangerous. I'm going to say that again, because I went through this and I continue to go through this. We're such conditional people, and we live in a conditional world. And this message is otherworldly, and it's unconditional, and it doesn't make natural sense to us. And so we have these inhibitions and red flags that go off inside of us. And I've had to fight those. I continue to fight those. I don't listen to those things. I try to avoid and run away from those red flags and inhibitions. When it comes to the gospel, all of our internal red flags and inhibitions are unreliable and dangerous. And anyone who encourages us to pay attention to them, Paul says, should be avoided. That's big. That's big. Avoid those. Avoid anybody who waters this down and tries to remove the shock value of it. Because it is shocking. I was talking to a pastor friend of mine. We were having a theological discussion. This is probably about 2 months ago. And we were going back and forth. We agreed on some things. We disagreed on other things. We're very close friends. I said one of the greatest hindrances to people actually hearing the shock of the gospel is our obsession with nuance. A preacher's obsession with nuance. Well, it's this, it's not this, it's not this, it's this. It's like, just let it be as radically unbalanced as it is. Just say it. It sounds crazy. I know it sounds like something out of this world because it is. It sounds like nothing we've ever heard before because it is. It sounds too good to be true. And those inhibitions and red flags that go off inside of us and go, that's what needs to be put to death. The flesh is always resistant to it is finished. Always. You want to talk about the mortification of sin? Start there. Start with that part of you that resists it is finished. That's what Paul calls unbelief. That's why Martin Luther was able to say that unbelief is the root of all sin. When you fail to believe the good news of the gospel, you give yourself to other things. You seek justification in other ways. So here's a good litmus test, okay? Whether it's a sermon, a book, a blog post, or a tweet, if the lasting impression you get causes you to feel anything other than lighter and freer, the gospel hasn't been communicated. Okay? Say it again. Here's the litmus test. You can evaluate, whoever you want. Evaluate me on this if you want. Feel free. You're supposed to be Berean-like, Checking. Check. I dare you. Check. Find out for yourself. Whether it's a sermon, book, blog post, or a tweet. You know what that is? Okay, hope so. If the lasting impression you get causes you to feel anything other than lighter and freer, the gospel hasn't been communicated. Or to put it another way, simply, if it doesn't sound like good news, it's not the gospel. That's what it means. It means good news. If it doesn't sound like good news to you, it's not the gospel. You may have heard some decent stuff, but you haven't heard the one thing that can set you free. You haven't heard the one thing you need to hear most. If it doesn't sound like good news, if it doesn't feel like good news, it's not the gospel. So this is Christianity. Let me define Christianity for you in the words of Jesus from Matthew 11. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. That's Christianity. I don't know what we have come to believe it is, but let's let Jesus tell us what it is. And that's what he says. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Rest. You will find rest for your souls. The church should be the one institution in all of society that gives rest to weary and heavy laden people. And all too often, that's not what weary and heavy laden people get when they go to church. They get a to-do list. They get a checklist of things that, whether the preacher has said it or not, things that intuitively they think they must do in order to get God to love them and accept them. That's not rest. That's not the invitation of our Lord. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, which is all of us, and I will give you rest. Not come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I'll tell you everything you did wrong and what you need to do to get yourself right. That's kind of the way preaching is these days. Whether it comes with a smile, a constant smile, okay, or a snarl, a constant snarl, and there are both. And the people on each of these spectrums are a lot more alike than they believe that they are. Because they're both saying the same thing. Do more, try harder. And if you don't hear the words of Jesus, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. You will seek to justify yourself by what you do, who you can become, and all of those things. So let me just conclude with this. Romans tells us three simple things, all right? First, we're desperately sick and in dire need of help. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. All of us. There is no us and them. It's just us and him. That's it. okay? So we're desperately sick and in dire need of help, and there is no way to self-heal. There's no way to self-heal. I mean, there's no way to get for yourself what only God promises to give. No matter how hard you try, no matter how much you set your mind to it, no matter how much you can muster up resolve and all of those things, you can't self-heal. So Romans tells us that. First, we're desperately sick, in dire need of help, and there's no way to self-heal. Second, while we were desperate, God sent a deliverer, a righteous substitute who took our death and gave us his life, who took our badness and gave us his goodness. That's the second thing we learned from Romans. And then finally, Romans teaches us that we're now free. We don't have to now shift our attention to being good, which is what we oftentimes do. Now that we're in, the focus is off of Jesus and what he's done, and now the focus is on me and what I need to do. And the Christian life becomes all about becoming good, even though we fail to realize that good, according to the Bible, is much deeper, much more demanding than what we think it is. It's perfection. So Romans says we're now free. We don't have to now shift our attention to being good. Remember, we are addicted to the idea of pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. Paul's made that very clear. But Romans tells us that goodness, the goodness that God requires, has already been given to us. It's ours. So rest. Rest. And what you'll discover is when you realize you don't have to do anything for God, you'll begin wanting to do everything for God. People say, what do you mean you can't say you don't have to do anything for God? Technically, you don't. Okay? You don't. And once you realize that, something happens inside, and you start saying almost instinctively, take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. Take my moments and my days, let them flow in ceaseless praise. Where does the motivation come from to follow God and to love God and others like God has told us to do? It comes from being loved and knowing that you're loved. We love him because he first loved us. So I've said this before, a simple definition of sanctification according to the Bible is loving God and loving others. Which begs the question, well, where does love for God and others come from? We love him because he first loved us. That's it. So it's this good news that the pressure's off, that our debt has been paid. We have been fully and finally pardoned. We're in forever. All of the acceptance and approval we long for are ours. It's that message, the good news of the gospel, which tells us that the pressure's off, that prompts Paul to end in praise. And I just want to close by reading the doxology again, beginning in verse 25. Now to him who is able to strengthen you according to my gospel. Notice where the strength comes from. It comes from the gospel, hearing the good news over and over and over and over again. Now to him who is able to strengthen you according to my gospel and the preaching of Jesus. The preaching of Jesus, specifically, according to the revelation of the mystery that was kept secret for long ages, but has now been disclosed, and through the prophetic writings has been made known to all nations according to the command of the eternal God, to bring about the obedience of faith. The obedience of faith. The faith that is gifted to us by God. It's not by works. It's by faith. By grace through faith. It's the obedience to faith. Believing. Our obedience is believing that Jesus paid it all. The obedience of faith. It's so important to get that. We're not against obedience here. Not against obedience in my house, not against obedience in my life. No, we're not against obedience. The kind of obedience God calls for is believe. Believe that there is a substitute who came to do for you what you could never do for yourself. To the only wise God be glory forevermore through Jesus Christ. Amen.